Hey everybody, this is Titans Day. We're about to do a Dice and Thief episode, but first, the White Lion just took a swipe and hit me in the head, and now I've got to see what kind of severe injury I've got. Oh great, I roll a 1. My head exploded. Your head erupts in a shower of gore, killing you instantly. All other survivors are also so disturbed that they lose 1 survival. I'm not sure how I'm going to do this episode without a head. Guess we'll find out. Welcome to another episode of Dice and Thief. Hope you brought your D20s because we're about to get all tabletop RPG on your butts. I'm Titans Day, also known as Alec. Joining with me today in my party is Jake and James.
What's up?
Hey.
Last episode, Bruce and I discussed how we got into video gaming. I'd like to briefly touch on tabletop gaming in particular tonight. How did we get into tabletop gaming and D&D style gaming in general? So what about you guys?
There's this guy, his name was Joe, and we met him in college. And he was like, hey, you guys want to come to my house on a Friday and just play some D&D?
Well, for me, it was a little earlier than that. Baldur's Gate was probably my first real introduction to Dungeons & Dragons rules. But even really prior to that, I played in person once on campus at college with a guy who knew what he was doing, and it was really fun. We actually got to play, I think it was 2nd edition, in a abandoned classroom that they foolishly allowed us to use for our own nefarious means, and I think it's pretty much been history then since then.
Yeah, and as for myself, actually, you guys were the reason I got into it. And it wasn't that long ago. It was probably 2011, I think. Was
Just 6 years.
So just about 6 years ago. Frankly, first time I played, I didn't like it at all. But it was one of those days where we had 11 people here.
Oh, yeah.
And we were playing a Mass Effect style, because Josh thought it would be cool because that was my favorite video game. And he thought, hey, you should come play. We're actually doing a Mass Effect D&D style game. But it was kind of awful because there was so many people there. It was really distracting, and I couldn't really get a sense of the way the game played. So,
yeah, that's the downside of having a big party. 5 or 6 is about as many as you want to have because it just gets so ridiculous. Everyone's trying to do stuff. People get bored. Cell phones come out. Twitter happens. Whatever. And it's not as fun.
Yeah, having small numbers of dedicated players is definitely better, I think. If I don't know that there is an RPG especially that is built for more than 4 or 5 is optimal party.
Yeah. And I kind of find that almost the smaller they are, the better.
Yeah, agreed.
Ways.
That's what she said. Not really.
I've run games for as few as 1 person, and they were magical and wonderful and extremely memorable. And I've run games for as many as
13
yeah. In somebody's garage. And it was also kind of weirdly wonderful. But it has a lot to do with just the chemistry of the people involved, and whether or not everybody is there to buy into the game itself.
I think we were in the 13. It was the apex of this big campaign you ran. It was the big end war and the big battles, and so everyone was all on the edge of their seat because crazy stuff was popping off. People were almost dying, and then some of us did die. Thank you so much for that. And everyone was just in awe of this great big event, and that was awesome. Could you do like a low-level dungeon crawl with 13 people? God, no. It would be awful.
Yeah, that sounds pretty terrible, actually.
Yeah.
Well, luckily, I actually came back for another session, and it was much better the second time. Having something to expect and kind of experiencing it a little bit before helped me prepare for the next time. But actually, what sold me on it was, I think you, James, played a character once that wanted to die. That was his goal in the campaign. And because I had always just assumed that, you didn't want to die in a game and you just did everything you could to survive or whatever. And then you actually made it a character moment. And for me, just like video games, immersion is kind of key. The spark for this series was a little game called Kingdom Death.
Little.
And when I say little, I mean little known, because it's actually massive in just about every way imaginable. It's not your typical board game. We did an unboxing video, so I don't want to go into too much detail about how much is in this game. And we have done how many sessions?
Gosh, I don't know, 5, maybe.
And we're just still kind of figuring out some of the nuances of the rules.
Oh, man. Yeah. I mean, this is like 17 pounds of board game. And it is so meticulously made and so just highly detailed and so rules heavy. It's like, I don't know. It's like nothing we've ever played, that's for sure.
What would you call Kingdom Death? Is it a board game? RPG? How would you describe the game in your own words?
I would say it's a hybrid. It's 17 pounds of board game mixed with some RPG elements, all designed to make you die in the most easiest way possible.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's the point of the game. I mean, that's the real point of the game, anyways.
Gruesome death.
I don't know. I tend to... I mean, anything can be an RPG, right? I mean...
Right. We talked about it in our video game, in the last video, that even Madden, the new Madden, has some RPG role-playing aspects because you play as a player.
Sure.
And you make choices about your career. And so just about every video game, every board game has some elements.
Right.
Even sports telecasting, they always want to know what the storylines are because they want you to invest. And when you invest in something in your role or in your point of view in a game or anything else, you become a bigger fan of it. And so role-playing games at their nature are storytelling which you invest yourself into. That's kind of what this game does.
So I think Kingdom Death is like on the weird scale of board games to role-playing games. It's way more of a role-playing game than Monopoly and way less of a role-playing game than, say, Pathfinder and Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, it's right there in a cushy middle.
Definitely wouldn't say happy medium because you're not
Nothing happy.
No,
And that's kind of the fun.
it's like an Oregon Trail when oh, Jenny got syphilis or gonorrhea. Oh wait. You know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
I don't think I played that version.
Yeah, what version of that game have you been playing, Jay?
Next question.
So, how do you guys, how do you play the game?
Well, you die a lot, and then you die some more, and you throw rocks at some stuff that could probably kill you if you had a shotgun until you kill it.
So there's the game uses these phases of play. So there's a sort of a role-playing aspect to the game insofar that your characters are actually attempting to prosper as a part of a settlement. And that part of the game kind of feels like a role-playing game, especially when you're trying to make decisions as a tribe. And you sort of put yourself in the shoes of the people who are the survivors there. But there are these other phases of the game in which There's like this hunting phase where you literally are just hunting down monsters so that your tribe can survive another year. You're trying to get materials for them all.
And that still feels RPG-ish because you're having to make decisions throughout the hunt on when you encounter something. Sometimes you have to roll, or you get to choose whether or not to roll and get certain items or gathering minerals or whatever it may be.
But I think the hunt is like this. It's like this segue moment. Like it's much more of like the hybrid part of this hybrid. Like if your settlement phase is more like an RPG, then your hunt is a little less like an RPG.
It's a transition.
And it is. It transitions to the more combat oriented part of the game, and it is like the combat portions of an RPG, except there's no dungeon master. The deck and the cards of the monsters AI deck and some other things are what actually influence that part of the thing. It's of course it is still combat, so you have decisions to make on like how you fight the creatures, but it's far, the rules make it far more gamey. And like, do you know what I mean? It's like it's like you. It's not like an RPG that you really delve into a character because you know your character is going to die like 7 times over. In fact, so you can't really invest much in a character in this game. Because
I've made the mistake of actually investing a little bit because I had a character that had lasted about 3 sessions and then she died in the most like anticlimactic way possible. She's dead. Because I rolled poorly on a settlement event. And she even survives a big boss battle easily and get back to camp, and then she's dead because I rolled poorly. And it was almost kind of like, wow, I can't really invest into these characters. I think that might be part of the point in that the settlement is the character. Is what you're trying to invest in, is your settlement, not necessarily the individual people, but it's your established community space and how your society is going to be set up and surviving these events that happen, strangers coming and seeing if you're worthy or not and then killing half of your population, that kind of stuff. So it's almost got this almost like simulator sort of building a city sort of feel to it too.
Yeah.
And that's, like you said, the RPG elements are in there.
Yeah, it's I think it is kind of telling that like the way that you excel, or I don't even want to say that, the way that you survive in this game is that you have to discount the individual member. This game is about communalism and the community thriving in a very hostile world. One that makes no ambiguities about how terrible it is. In fact, this is not the kind of game that you want to play if say you're really used to, like, if you're that guy who's like, I always want to play a paladin and evildoers beware. You're gonna die quick.
Calling me out? What you doing there?
I mean,
I saw that.
a little
Okay,
bit.
fine.
Just the tunes.
Okay, all right. I agree. Also, it's about the community thing. It's you are trying to advance your society, but it's hard when you've been a role-playing game player for a long time. Who you invest in your character, your way you build things, and your story, your overall contribution to the group story. And in this game, that's just out the window. You may have like a session or two, but really it's about the community. It's about the group and things like that. So, but yeah, you can play any game the way you want to. You can be the dopey paladin do-gooder who wants to be like Superman. You're just gonna die first.
Yeah.
There's no getting around it.
I think something you said about this game that differentiates it from other similar kinds of games, you don't really build a character
No.
in this game. I mean, you literally slap a name on a character sheet, and that's it. That's your character.
Oh, and you actually get a point of survival if you name the character.
So it's not even a requirement.
It knows that you aren't necessarily always going to want to name your characters, especially right after you just had a character die that you might have invested a little bit into because maybe they've survived several years in the game. And so it says, you get an extra survival point if you name the character, and that's the kind of game it is.
So if you're making a Dungeons and Dragons character, the fundamentals of doing that are you stare at your sheet, you look at your books, you figure out what you'd like to play, the type of character you'd like to play, the race, the gender, the background story, and all of this. This game instead is like it hands you an empty sheet, and it builds your character as you play through it. The more you survive, the more your character changes.
Yeah.
From normal human being to honestly frequently insane, diseased sociopath who has a sword.
Yeah. Yeah, and in fact, you can lose an arm and keep going in this game. And it's just that kind of brutal experience that I think is some of the aspects that are kind of interesting about it, where your choices actually really impact what happens, in the sense that you may decide to do this, and you could result in dying if you decide to do it. So choices actually have major consequences for your characters, unlike some other RPG games where you actually have to do quite badly to die in some aspects.
Yeah, especially if your GM or DM is pretty lenient. There is no GM or DM in this game. It's just cold.
Yeah. Now, granted, there's actually a way to play with a DM, which is, I think, really interesting too. That you can actually play the game like a traditional kind of RPG.
I wouldn't say the game is cold. I would say it's just unforgiving. It
is unforgiving.
It's turn the card, your character dies. Turn the card, you die. Turn the card, you die. And it was, it's also kind of funny. Like it might even be yourself that gets the blowback from what you do. There was the second session we played. I would go up and hit the creature, and it would have an ability. But because something had happened earlier in the fight, it kept hitting Alec over and over and over again. And I did no damage to it. I just followed around like swatting at it, pissing it off, and it would chase Alec down and bite him.
Yeah.
And it was a lot of fun. I felt really bad about it, but I survived, so that was cool.
Yeah, I think I've died more than anybody else in this game. So I've gotten kind of used to that and kind of accepted that as just an aspect of the game. And you almost have to embrace that kind of thing, or you may not necessarily enjoy your experience.
Yeah, it's swingy, and it's high risk, high reward, and the decisions that you make will have an impact, whether it's positive or negative. It tends not to be positive.
Well, yeah, but in fact, though, failure is not always completely negative, in the sense that even if you lose your settlement, like you can literally, everybody dies, but the things that you have done with that settlement continue on for the next group of people that you play. And so in some ways your failure eventually can help succeed you in the game. Like it can actually help you gain some momentum in the game.
Yeah, like when we got leprosy, and it makes you take less damage, which makes no sense.
Yeah, and insanity is actually a good thing in the game. Well, up to a certain point. There was one encounter where at the end of the fight, I think it's with the screaming antelope, at the end of it, it said when it's defeated, if you have plus 20 insanity, you run off into the darkness never to be seen again, and your character is dead.
Right. If you enjoy games that don't necessarily have predictable consequences, like this is it. This game, failing a die roll can mean really interesting results, and sometimes succeeding means less interesting results, and vice versa. It's very well designed, I think, so that it is both brutally hard, but also it's never dull.
Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah. Even the deaths are kind of fun. Like when you roll to see how you die, or what kind of severe injury you get. There's a little bit of kind of excitement to it, I think, just to see the, like disembowelment and that kind of thing. So,
Yeah, it's like flipping through a medieval torture. I don't know. It's really bizarre.
and the one
They
thing
thought
I'm
of a
gonna,
lot.
yeah, and the one thing I'm looking forward to is some of the later Lantern Year aspects, because it looks like to me that you're supposed to fail a lot at the beginning, but as your society progresses, when children are born, they're actually born further ahead than your original characters. So they gain things like weapon mastery right off the bat if you've had a character live long enough to get there, so they benefit from the previous generation. So this is actually a generational kind of game where your children from your first characters may actually go on and live and create a society that can function and stuff like that. And those characters are actually can have some success. So we've been playing the crap out of it recently, and in my humble opinion, I've been having a blast. However, I'm not the only one whose opinion matters here. I personally enjoy it a ton, but what about you guys? What do you think of the game in general?
I like it a lot. I like the excuse me. I like the combat. Sometimes it feels like so completely unfair, but the biggest thing I enjoy about the game, to be honest, is the really, really messed up moral decisions you have to make. Not going to give anything away, but like the first time you have someone die at camp is just really, really weird and so good, because you're like, oh my gosh, do I choose really messed up door number 1 or really messed up door number 2? What are the benefits? Well, you don't get to read the benefits first. You make the decision and then get your consequences after the fact. Combat's fun, especially when you actually have some decent gear and you can actually relatively stand a chance. You're not just hoping and praying you don't get torn to pieces. But the moral decisions and the planning stages of the game are probably the best parts, in my opinion.
I mean, I kind of agree. I think the moral conundrums that you face in this game are some of the most interesting bits. It's like it is a game written by Thomas Hobbes, in that you sort of get the understanding that the designer of the game understands that human nature is a little vile, and they give you plenty of opportunities to exercise those notions. And they don't necessarily punish those notions like a lot of games do. It's far more like something, as far as the morals are concerned, it's far more like something like Fallout 1 and 2, maybe a little bit more like New Vegas, in which you can make a morally wrong decision and benefit from it.
Right. Or even Skyrim.
Yeah, in a lot of cases. Yeah. It's the RPG aspects are a much more like a neutral, open world environment game than the combat and societal rule set is.
Yeah. And it seems to have consequences for the whole entire society, not just an individual. So if you all it's almost kind of a group decision. If you all decide to do this thing, that's going to impact the way you raise your young, the way you bury your dead, the way you, so on and so forth.
I think my most favorite part about the game is honestly the difficulty level. It's very rare that we get to play a game that that is just so darn hard. I mean, we've gone through generations of characters
already,
and we've played half a dozen times or so. I mean, it's been years in game, and I think the rule system, the difficulty of navigating the rule system mirrors the difficulty level of actually playing the game, and it makes a lot of weird sense in a way once you get to understand the rules. Why everything is so harsh, I think.
It's kind of like if you ever played the Demon Souls or Dark Souls games. The first time you play, you're like, "Oh my god, this is so freaking hard." But as you become more skilled, it's like any other thing you do. You just become more skilled, and it becomes easier. Well, this game, it doesn't become easier.
Well, yeah. I mean, we've only played like 7 or 8 years of the game, so it could we could have characters perceivably that, especially the children of our original characters, that gain some abilities that help them, and that kind of thing. So I think we'll have to wait and see. It may be like a Dark Souls thing where you start to understand how the mechanics work with the monsters, and you start to memorize these the monsters and know how to tackle each one, and then you face another one that you have no clue and you get your butt kicked.
Well, yeah,
kind of like in Dark Souls, where you do that.
I would say that if you talked about your character earlier who survived these 2 encounters, it was epic. You rolled a 3 back in the village, stark raving mad.
Yeah.
And by the way, ran off all the gear she was wearing. Couldn't give it to anybody else. The gear was gone. So the benefits we gained, we lost those because.
Well, actually, no. You actually get to keep the.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah,
I think I
get to
keep.
Yeah, you get to keep the gear. So if you have characters who go out on hunts, for example, and they all get wiped out, you actually get to keep the gear, and I think that's more of a necessity of the game mechanics than a logic kind of thing, because logically you would think that that gear would just be lost, or you'd have to go searching for them or something.
Yeah.
But I think the creators of the game realized they created such a difficult kind of game that if you were to lose everything that you built, you're someone's toast at that point, because the upscaling of the enemies as you go along gets harder and harder, and without that gear to build on, to break back down and build into new things, you're not gonna be able to survive at all. And it's going to be kind of a miserable experience from that on out. So I think they just kind of did that just so they can give you a little bit of a incentive. Because if you think about it, you wouldn't want to risk facing higher level creatures if you had the potential of losing everything that you built. So the idea is, well, we can take this risk and go hunt this massively leveled creature in order to. It's like a risk reward sort of thing. But the risk isn't total annihilation of everything that you've built. And so players are more willing to take risk than they otherwise would. And I think that's the reason why they did that.
Okay. I think what I dislike about the game the most, though, is probably adapting to the fact you're going to die. Because, I mean, coming in, everyone says, oh, it's Kingdom Death. It's not Kingdom Funland. You're going to die. And so getting used to just the hopelessness, it kind of builds a little bit when you're like, I want to live. Oh gosh, I can't possibly live. And then, that is one thing, and that's pretty much it. Just adapting to the difficulty and the fact that the first person you roll up, you're going to die.
As a traditional D&D player.
Because you're so ingrained in those things.
Yeah.
James?
Man, I think if I had to say something I dislike about the game, I think it would go back to that gaminess that the game sort of represents. There are, I think even in this newest iteration of Dungeons and Dragons, role-playing games tend to, even the crunchiest rule sets for role-playing games have rules that try to at least stay out of your way and let you, at least at most points, be able to play a role. You take on that persona of that character. But because of the brevity of life in this game, and not just because of that, but because of that and the serious crunch that the rules set entails, there's no getting around the feeling of I am playing a game. Its role-playing elements are are very tight, very good, but the rules themselves are they sort of infringe on notions of like the propriety that role-playing games, especially role-playing games that use what did you call it earlier, like a
Power fantasy.
yeah, power fantasy.
Oh, this is definitely not one of those kind of games.
This is like
So if that's what you're seeking, then you're probably going to be disappointed.
right, and I think most role-playing games are kinds of power simulations, right? You play the elf who surfs on a shield down the stairs whilst shooting a bunch of orcs because there's a certain kind of emotional connection to that, like Legolas, like life something that you probably aren't in real life. I'm gonna guess,
Right.
like being able to play that thing that is greater than you and put yourself in the shoes of that giant is kind of neat. And this game turns that notion on its head. You're the NPC.
Yeah.
And the giants are out there looking for you.
Yeah. Well, and I think that might be it's kind of like it can be a weakness, but it also a strength in the sense that when you do beat the monster that when we first played, I think we died like the first 2 times we played party wide, right?
At least twice.
When the final time we played and were actually able to beat the lion, it was actually kind of
It was
exhilarating.
jubilant. Yeah.
And that kind of thing doesn't always happen in some other experiences. It's almost kind of like the thrill of victory and the utter crushing defeat of loss. It can both be a positive and a negative kind of thing.
I'd guess I would say that this is a game that in which emotions could definitely run hot and high. I think it's the kind of game that you probably have to know the people you're playing with pretty well, to be honest. Like,
yes.
I mean, aside from the fact that the rules are dense, this is not a game that you don't invite the new guy to.
No, this is not. This is the usual crew plays this game.
Yeah, that's probably true. Now, I could see the board gaminess actually being a benefit for new players.
Yeah,
because
maybe.
there's so for example, I actually think it would be not kind of neat to play by yourself. Like, it's a game that you could completely play on your own without anybody else, because you can play each 4 of the characters, and because you don't need a DM to run it for you, you can literally just play a whole settlement on your own. Yeah. And that kind of thing is kind of cool, I think.
It is interesting. It kind of reminds me of the old, like, single-player D&D adventures from, I don't know, 80s or 70s. I can't even remember. But it's like there are rules that you can play with larger parties in this game than the 4 that is suggested, like highly suggested. And there's also there's that rule set for playing with just you and the game. And I don't know, solitary or masturbatory. I'm not real sure which it is.
So, like, as a guy who's not played D&D as long as you guys have, this game, in some aspects, is more appealing. In part because we're all coming into it at the same level. Where you all have actually played D&D a lot longer, I feel like I'm always kind of like several steps behind in terms of knowledge. Where in this game, we're all on a level playing field. And I've actually invested quite a bit in terms of reading the rules and things like that. And it doesn't feel as daunting as D&D. Like, yes, it's a thick rule book, but it's still a finite limit.
Right.
This isn't, 30, 40-year-old game that's been around forever and there's this history to it. It's kind of like getting on the ground floor of something, and that's kind of exciting for me.
Yeah, that's really cool. I think, plus it doesn't hurt that the artwork is amazing.
Oh, yeah.
And the lore behind the game, the general overall story is just pretty fantastic. Whoever wrote it, whoever did all this work, it's a pretty stellar product.
We've done a lot of comparing it to Dungeons and Dragons.
yeah. I mean, that's probably the most natural
probably
comparison. I mean, it feels like that's where part of the inspiration came from, but at the same time, it's its own thing.
It really is. It's I don't know. It is a bizarre like amalgam of parts, and part of this game is similar to Dungeons and Dragons, and I guess that's the shoehorn that we're all using here because it's probably the most familiar. I mean, honestly, to us, but also probably to whatever audience this is going to get to. And it's in the same like line of esoteric. Like if you enjoy Dungeons and Dragons as a game, then you're probably doing it as an outlier. It's something you do instead of playing a video game these days. You know,
actually, it reminds me a lot of playing some kind of Civ game.
Yeah,
like Civilization kind of game.
Yeah.
Actually.
Just not as zoomed out as a Civ game. Not as
right.
like,
more personal, a little bit more intimate.
Microcosmal.
Yeah.
I guess what other things could we compare this game to? We've made the Civilization comparison. We made the Dark Souls and the Dungeons and Dragons comparison.
That's yeah.
I mean, there's not really a lot of you don't really have a lot of special powers that you have to keep up with. There's no like Vancian magic system that you would find in Dungeons and Dragons or similar.
No.
There's not even like a 4th edition-esque times per day ability thing.
Right.
You have a finite number of very, very precious resources, and when they're gone, they're gone. And I mean, I don't even know what other role-playing games or tabletop games you could
even video games for that matter.
And there's really not anything like this. It's pretty much its own unique thing. I mean, even in the Souls games, you keep respawning. You just lose what you were carrying. At the
right,
time.
and you have to go back and find your equipment. And stuff like that.
If you can get that far. But there's in this game, if you die, if your society gets wiped out, you start over from scratch.
From scratch
on the ashes of that former society.
Yeah. And the other thing that I look forward to doing is just the lore and like the mystery of the world aspect, because the characters just wake up in this place.
Yeah, if you've ever read anything by Junji Ito, the anime manga artist and writer, I mean, this world is right out of this man's imagination. It's like a love story to H.P. Lovecraft, but with this vast introduction to, I would say, even weirder segments of cosmic fantasy and cosmic horror. It is bizarre.
Yeah.
I mean, you just said horror, and it kind of keyed off my mind. Like, it's almost survival horror-esque. I mean, you're not hoarding bullets running from zombies a la Resident Evil, but
it's close.
I mean, you're like, I got this scrap of cloth from killing this lion. I can now make a scrap of cloth into a armband that lets me take one less damage. Oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
Or you lucky enough to poke out the cat's eye and you get this really awesome thing. But again, that doesn't work against the other later enemies we've fought because they're just that much bigger and more powerful.
What was that one video game where it was a zombie survival game where you actually set up a community and you didn't play one character, you could switch in between multiple characters and you would go out and collect resources and things that survive. It's not Dying Light. There's another.
Is it Left 4 Dead?
No, not Left 4 Dead, because that was that multiplayer game.
Yeah.
I couldn't. I'm drawing a blank.
I mean, Dying Light's sort of like that.
All I'm picturing is Brad Pitt on an airplane.
If I find the name of the game, I'll post it on here, and I might.
Brad Pitt's okay.
Throw it on the screen right now.
Yeah, don't let him lie to you though. He has the Ultra Platinum Special Edition of Troy in his DVD case right now.
Not at all. That guy was pretty good at killing Nazis.
He was.
You just think he's pretty. Don't lie.
That's about as far as I. This has gotten really weird. This is awkward.
We're not editing that out.
But it's like Walking Dead in some ways. Like, you just kind of feel like your characters are The Walking Dead, like they're going to die eventually, or
Yeah.
And even the character sheets, if you look at it, there's a point where if your character gets to a certain age, they retire. Like it's a finite limit to how long you can play with a particular character. Period.
Yeah.
And I think it would be cool when we actually have a character who gets to retire. That might actually be like.
Man, I cannot imagine that this person's retirement is going to be an awesome thing, though. Like, I mean, unless we've scrapped up this, unless we've scrapped together this civilization that can somehow cobble together gold watches and make a hut as a retirement home, I'm imagining. And, just maybe it's just my expectation of this game now, but I kind of imagine that when a character retires in this game, that it's sort of like it's got to be kind of like Jack London's The Law of Life, in which, like, you got this person who retires by being left out on a glacier someplace to die, I can't imagine that this game would allow somebody to pass peacefully into that good night.
Right. I mean, because nothing ever seems to work out exactly the way you want it in this game. So if you could give one recommendation to new players, what would you tell them?
I would say don't hope that you're going to live. Just given the fact that you're going to die, and make it as memorable and as fun as possible.
I think it's pretty good advice. Yeah, you're gonna die. Just bear with the fact. I think this game is much more about what you actually do manage to accomplish during your character's very brief existence.
Yeah, I would agree with both of you guys. It's just, you have to, if you've played RPGs before, set aside some of those notions of owning your character.
Yeah.
Well, this has been an episode of Dyson Thief. I hope you guys have stuck with us, and if you have, please give us a like or subscribe, because it always encourages us to keep doing this. Peace.